If you own rental property in America right now, you need to stop everything and listen to this. New rental rules have absolutely killed landlords across this country, and millions of them are getting out of the business entirely. This isn't some future threat. This is happening right now, in your city, in your state. And if you don't understand what's coming next, you could lose everything you've built. I'm not exaggerating. The government doesn't care about landlords anymore, and the numbers are terrifying. Stay with me, because what I'm about to break down could save your financial future, or at least help you understand why your portfolio is bleeding money. Why this is a big crisis audio. Here's what's really happening, and most people have no idea how bad this is. Over the past 3 years, we've seen an unprecedented assault on private property rights disguised as tenant protection. I'm talking about sweeping new regulations, eviction moratoriums that never truly ended in some places, rent control expansions, and new laws that make it nearly impossible to remove a non-paying tenant. This isn't just about one bad policy in California or New York. This is a nationwide trend, and it's creating a crisis that will reshape the American housing market for decades. Landlords are being squeezed from every direction. Property taxes are skyrocketing. Insurance costs have gone through the roof, and now these new rental rules are the final straw. The National Rental Home Council reported that small landlords, those who own between 1 and 10 units, are selling at record rates. We're talking about millions of units leaving the rental market permanently. And here's the part that should make every investor furious. As landlords are forced out, the very people these laws claim to help, the renters, are facing higher prices and fewer options. It's economic insanity, and the people writing these laws either don't understand basic economics or they simply don't care. What the new rental rules actually are. Audio. Let me break down exactly what these new rental rules are, because you need to understand the specifics to grasp how devastating they are. First, we've got the expansion of just cause eviction requirements. In states like California, Washington, and Oregon, and cities like New York and Chicago, you can no longer simply non-renew a lease when it expires. You need a government-approved reason, and guess what? Wanting to renovate, sell, or even move a family member in often doesn't qualify, or requires you to pay the tenant thousands of dollars in relocation assistance. In Portland, Oregon, landlords are required to pay up to $4,500 just to non-renew a lease. $4,500 to get your own property back. Then there's the new wave of rent control. It's not just old-school rent control anymore. We're seeing rent stabilization laws that cap increases at 3% or less annually, even when your property taxes just jumped 20% and your insurance doubled. In California, statewide rent control now applies to most properties over 15 years old, capping increases at 5% plus inflation, but never more than 10% total. Sounds reasonable until you realize that inflation hit 9%, meaning your costs went up 9%, but you can only raise rent by 10%. And that's before you factor in the new maintenance requirements. Speaking of which, many cities are now mandating things like air conditioning installation, lead paint remediation timelines that are nearly impossible to meet, and habitability standards that are so vague that any tenant complaint can trigger a city inspection and fines. Then there's the security deposit limits. In states like New York, you can only charge 1 month's rent as a security deposit, which is a joke when a tenant destroys your unit and the repairs cost $15,000. And don't even get me started on the application fee restrictions, the new tenant screening laws that make it harder to check criminal history or eviction records, and the mandatory lease terms that are now being pushed in places like Illinois and Maryland. These aren't protections. These are handcuffs designed to make landlording so miserable and unprofitable that you voluntarily quit. How these rules are destroying landlords. Audio. Now let's talk about how these rules are actually destroying landlords financially, because this is where the pain gets real. Imagine you're a landlord in Los Angeles. You bought a duplex in 2019. You put 20% down. You did everything right. Your mortgage is $4,000 a month. Your property taxes are $8,000 a year and climbing. Your insurance just went from $2,000 to $6,000 annually because of wildfire risk and general market chaos. Your tenant, who's been paying $2,200 a month since 2019, stops paying. Under the old rules, you could start eviction proceedings and have them out in maybe 60 to 90 days. Under the new rules, good luck. In Los Angeles, the eviction process can now take 8 months to a year, and during that entire time you're paying the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the utilities, and the legal fees while collecting zero rent. And here's the kicker. During those 8 months, you still can't raise the rent on your other unit enough to cover the loss because of rent control. So you're bleeding cash every single month, and your reserves are evaporating. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening to thousands of landlords in California right now. Or take a landlord in New York City. They have a rent-stabilized building, and the Rent Guidelines Board just approved a 3% increase for one-year leases and 5% for two-year leases. Meanwhile, their water bill went up 12%, their fuel costs jumped 40%, and their property taxes increased 6%. They're supposed to maintain the building, pay the staff, handle repairs, and somehow turn a profit with a 3% revenue increase against 20% cost increases. It's mathematically impossible. And when they try to sell to get out, the building is worth less because the income is capped and the regulatory burden makes it toxic to buyers. Cash flow negative, equity trapped, regulations suffocating. That's the reality for millions of American landlords today. They don't care about landlords. They see you as an ATM with no withdrawal limits, and they're hitting you with fees, fines, legal delays, and tenant protections that ignore the fundamental reality that you have bills to pay too. The Great Landlord Exodus audio. This is insane, but it's exactly why we're seeing the Great Landlord Exodus right now. Millions of landlords are getting out, and the data is staggering. According to the National Association of Realtors and various housing market analyses, small landlords, those mom-and-pop investors who own 1 to 4 units, have been net sellers for 3 consecutive years. We're talking about an estimated 2 to 3 million rental units being converted from rentals to owner-occupied homes, or simply sitting empty because the owners can't deal with the hassle anymore. Redfin and Zillow data shows that investor purchases of single-family homes dropped by over 40% from the peak in 2021. But more importantly, small investor selling has outpaced buying for the first time in modern history. In California, the California Apartment Association reported that membership among small landlords has declined significantly, not because they joined other groups, but because they sold and left the industry entirely. In New York, the number of rent-stabilized units being abandoned by landlords, literally walking away from buildings because the economics don't work, has hit crisis levels. The city of New York had to take over hundreds of buildings in the past 2 years because landlords simply stopped paying taxes and maintaining them. They gave up. They walked away. And it's not just the coasts. In Illinois, particularly Chicago, new landlord-tenant ordinances have driven small landlords to sell in record numbers. In Minneapolis, after the rent control vote, small landlords flooded the market with listings. In Seattle, the combination of just cause eviction, first-in-time rental laws, and caps on move-in fees has made it so difficult to operate that many landlords are converting their rentals to short-term vacation properties or just selling to first-time homebuyers. This exodus is creating a massive problem. Every time a landlord sells to an owner-occupant, that's one less rental unit on the market. Every time a small apartment building is converted to condos, that's 5 or 10 rentals gone forever. And with institutional buyers pulling back because interest rates are high, there's nobody left to fill the gap. The rental supply is shrinking while demand keeps growing, and the people hurt most are the renters who now face bidding wars for apartments and rent increases that make the old rates look like a dream. Who is most affected in Real Stories audio? So who is most affected? It's the small landlords, the mom-and-pop operators, the people who saved for years to buy a duplex or a fourplex, the ones who thought real estate was their path to retirement. These are not greedy corporations. These are teachers, firefighters, nurses, and small business owners who own a rental or two to supplement their income or build generational wealth. They're the ones getting crushed because they don't have the legal teams, the lobbyists, or the economies of scale to absorb these new costs. Let me tell you about Maria from San Diego. She owns a triplex that she inherited from her parents. She worked her whole life to maintain it, kept rents below market to help long-term tenants, and treated her property like a family legacy. Then California's statewide rent control hit, her property taxes jumped, and when one tenant stopped paying during the pandemic and refused to leave, She spent 11 months and $18,000 in legal fees to get an eviction. By the time it was over, she was $60,000 in debt and had to sell the building to an institutional buyer for less than it was worth. She cried when she signed the papers. Or take Dave in Chicago. He owned 6 units in a South Side neighborhood, invested in renovations, provided quality housing, and employed a local handyman. After the Cook County Just Cause for Eviction ordinance passed, combined with new security deposit restrictions and mandatory attorney representation for tenants in certain cases, his cash flow turned negative. He sold all 6 units to a house flipping company. 6 families lost their homes because the new owner renovated and sold them as condos. Dave told me he felt like the city forced him to displace his own tenants. Then there's the story of a couple in Portland, Oregon, who owned a small apartment building. When the city required them to pay relocation assistance of up to $4,500 per unit to non-renew leases for a necessary renovation, they realized they couldn't afford to improve the building and couldn't afford to keep it as is. They walked away. Just stopped paying the mortgage and let the bank take it. These stories are everywhere. California, New York, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Maryland. The small landlord is an endangered species, and when they're gone, you're left with 2 options: government housing, which is a disaster, or massive corporate landlords who don't care about tenants and have the lawyers to exploit every loophole. What smart landlords should do now: audio. But here's the thing. If you're still in this game, and I know many of you are because real estate is still one of the best wealth builders in history, you need an action plan right now. First, you need to know your local laws better than your attorney does. I'm serious. Every city, every county, every state has different rules, and they're changing constantly. Join your local landlord association, your apartment owners association, or your real estate investor group. These organizations are fighting for you, and they have the legal updates you need to stay compliant without getting destroyed. Second, screen like your life depends on it, because it does. With eviction moratoriums still lingering in some areas and court backlogs making evictions take forever, your best defense is never letting a bad tenant in. Use every legal screening tool available. Check credit, check evictions, verify employment personally, call previous landlords, and if your state allows it, consider month-to-month leases instead of long-term leases so you have more flexibility, assuming just cause laws don't trap you anyway. Third, raise your rents to market rate legally and immediately if you're below market. I know that sounds harsh, and many of you have long-term tenants you care about, but you cannot afford to subsidize housing out of your own pocket anymore. The math doesn't work. Raise rents at the maximum legal amount every single year, because if you don't, you're falling behind permanently. Fourth, build a war chest. You need 12 to 18 months of operating expenses per property and cash reserves. Not 6 months, not 3 months, 18 months. Because if a tenant stops paying and you're in a backlogged court system, you need to survive the siege. Fifth, consider restructuring your portfolio. If you own in a high-regulation state like California or New York, evaluate whether the cash flow justifies the risk. Maybe you sell and do a 1031 exchange into a landlord-friendly state like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, or the Carolinas. I'm not telling you to panic sell, but I am telling you to run the numbers honestly. If your property is cash flow negative and the regulatory environment is getting worse, holding on for appreciation might be a gamble you can't afford. Sixth, get umbrella insurance and make sure your properties are held in the right entities. With tenant-friendly laws making it easier to sue landlords for everything from habitability issues to emotional distress, you need asset protection. And finally, consider professional property management if you're self-managing. Yes, it costs 8 to 10%, but a good manager knows the local laws, knows the courts, and can navigate this nightmare better than you can while you're working your day job. Look, I'm not here to scare you for no reason. I'm here because someone needs to tell the truth about what's happening to American landlords, and the mainstream media isn't doing it. They paint us as villains, but we're the ones providing housing, maintaining communities, and taking financial risks that most people won't take. If you own rental property, you need to take this seriously. The rules have changed, the game has gotten harder, and the margin for error is gone. Share this video with every landlord you know, because most of them are still operating like it's 2019, and that's going to get them wiped out. Drop a comment below and tell me what state you're in and what crazy new rule just hit your market. I read every comment, and I want to know where the battlefield is hottest. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because I'm going to keep breaking down the policies, the strategies, and the truth that you won't hear anywhere else. The government isn't coming to save you. The tenant advocacy groups aren't going to suddenly care about your mortgage. Your only protection is knowledge, preparation, and the willingness to adapt fast. Millions of landlords are getting out. Don't be one of them unless it's part of your plan. Be smart, be tough, and protect what you've built. I'll see you in the next one.